I wanted to take a minute to go through the sources that Guerrilla Hebrew presented in the debate that we did on who are the legitimate children of Israel. For sure, I really like the way he presented things. I'm used to academic debates. I almost never use a PowerPoint in a debate, and the folks I'm debating don't. We'll just quote sources. We'll refer to things that others are familiar with. But there's another type of debate called conscious debate that many others are familiar with, where you're really going to post all your sources and put everything up for folks to see. So that's not the normal way I do it. I just referred to them in my PowerPoint presentation. But I really like the way Guerrilla Hebrew put those up for everyone to see, and people said, hey, he came with sources. Well, the question is, one, did he represent the sources accurately? Two, are the sources themselves accurate, right? We would all agree those are the big questions. So let's look at this objectively, honestly, and ask the question, did Guerrilla Hebrew present sources that back his arguments? And I put this together in PowerPoint slides, so I'm going to go through things one point after another. Hopefully this will be clear to you. So let's start here. Professor Harry Abramson, let's listen to what Guerrilla Hebrew says about Professor Harry Abramson and his position.
So I want to take you guys to a man by the name of Dr. Henry Abramson, right? And he's notable for his teachings on Jewish history and Judaism as a religion. He was assistant and later associate professor of history and Jewish studies at Florida Atlantic University from 96 to 06. And during that time, he held appointments at a number of prestigious universities such as Oxford, Cornell, Harvard, and Hebrew University. He received his PhD in history from the University of Toronto. Dr. Michael Brown has even recently referenced his work on his Line of Fire show to assist a caller in understanding Jews in the diaspora, right? So he's a very qualified man and somebody who Dr. Michael Brown recognizes as credible, right? When describing the founding and genetic bottleneck event for the Ashkenazi Jews, he names the Kalonymus family as the nucleus thereof. Sometime around the year 800 CE, a small group of Jews, he says, left northern Italy. The Kalonymus family, for example, they made their way to the Rhineland in contemporary Germany. Those people formed the nucleus of Ashkenazi Jewry. So according to Dr. Henry Abramson, this Kalonymus family is a former of the nucleus of Ashkenazi Jewry.
All right, so let's review what Guerrilla Hebrew said. He said of Professor Harry Abramson, quote, he is a very qualified man and someone whom Dr. Michael Brown recognizes as credible. When describing the founding and bottleneck event for the Ashkenazi Jews, he names the Kalonymus family as the nucleus thereof. Actually, he doesn't do that. We'll see that in a moment. Professor Abramson, sometime around the year 800 CE, a small group of Jews left northern Italy, The Kalonymus family, for example. The Kalonymus family is not the nucleus of Ashkenazi Jewry, but one of many families that form the nucleus. So let's look at this more carefully, all right? They made their way to Rhineland in contemporary Germany. Those people formed the nucleus of Ashkenazi Jews, not the Kalonymus family. The Kalonymus family, among many others. For example, what do you think there are all the dots there? Because Guerrilla Hebrew didn't tell you the rest of what he said. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen to what Professor Harry Abramson, according to Guerrilla Hebrew, a very qualified man. Listen to what he has to say about the origins of Ashkenazi Jews.
The enduring questions in Jewish history has been like, how exactly did the Ashkenazi Jews get there? And there are a few different models of migration. Here, have a look at this map, which takes advantage of new research available through DNA studies. And the model, which seems to be the most definitive, and in fact the study that I'll look at with you today seems to confirm it, indicates that most Ashkenazi Jews, or at least a plurality of them, have their roots in the Middle East, of course in the region of ancient Israel, with a strong admixture of Italian DNA, meaning that they migrated from the ancient site of Israel through the Italian peninsula before they made their way to the heartland of Ashkenaz in northern Europe. There's also a significant admixture of Sephardic Jewry. You see them coming from the Iberian Peninsula after perhaps a trek across North Africa, and then moving into Provence, the south of France, and then up into the Ashkenazic heartland. But the main trend of migration, which has historically been accepted based on literary evidence, like the Kalonymus family settling there and so on, has always been through the Italian peninsula. And some partial DNA results have indicated that there's support for that.
All right, so he's telling you right here that the majority of Ashkenazi Jews trace their roots back to the Middle East, ancient Israel. That's the very thing that I have been saying, not to some alleged Khazar conversion centuries later, but to ancient Israel. That's where my ancestors come from. That's what Professor Harry Abramson said. Remember, according to Guerrilla Hebrew, he is a very reliable, very credible source. But there's more. Let's listen to more from Professor Abramson.
But I'm very grateful to my colleague, Dr. Ellie Dolgan, who is a science writer who shared with me this fascinating preprint study that's going to be appearing in a very prestigious journal soon. And it gave us the results of a new study that comes out of Erfurt, Germany. Let me show you that study and explain how it depicts in much greater detail the genetic history of early Ashkenazi Jews. So first of all, it's dealing with this site in Germany, the city of Erfurt, which has a known, well-documented Jewish community living there. The title of the article is Genome-wide Data from Medieval German Jews Show that the Ashkenazi Founder Event predated the 14th century. And there are over 20 authors from really prestigious institutions all over the world, led by S. Waldman, putting together this amazing piece of research. It's about 100 pages long in total. I was so fascinated to read it.
This is the most recent detailed study, genetic study, top prestigious scholars, peer-reviewed research on the origins of Ashkenazi Jews. Okay, more from Professor Abramson.
Then there is a significant historical displacement with the Roman Jewish Wars, starting with the Great War from 66 to 74 of the Common Era. A massive number of Jews are displaced from ancient Israel and taken as slaves to Rome. That number is expanded with the Bar Kokhba rebellion 70-odd years later. And there's already an existing Jewish diaspora community living in the Italian peninsula, so that's when you have a significant population of Jews moving to that part of the world. So beginning in the 1st, 2nd century in particular, you have Jews who are also marrying South Italians and then later North Italians, and the genetic base of those Jews who are displaced to Italy is naturally expanded by their connections with other people.
So his ancestors, my ancestors, we are both Ashkenazi Jews. He's saying go back to ancient Israel and can be traced directly back to Jews who were sold into slavery in Rome after the first Jewish revolt in the year 70 AD. So almost 2,000 years ago, sold into slavery in Rome. Other Jews were already living there in Italy in the diaspora. And then from there, over time, intermarrying with Italians, so these, especially women, converting into Judaism and now joining the Jewish community, etc. So this is what Professor Abramson said, that we go back to ancient Israel, and we can even trace directly to communities in ancient Rome after the first Jewish revolt in the 1st century of this era, 2,000 years back. Okay, one more clip.
And basically the picture we have is where the number 1 is. You have the Jews exiled from Israel in the context of the Roman Jewish Wars. They settle in Italy, and there they mix with the local Italian population and eventually make their way up to the Ashkenazic heartland. And the actual percentages, now, it's hard to calculate precisely because there's some time where you have a lot of southern Italian influence and later the northern Italian influence, but the authors of this study suggest that the Middle Eastern DNA of the Erfurt remains is somewhere between 15 and 45%, depending on the individual and how you measure the difference between southern and northern Italian influence. And that Italian influence is somewhere between 45 and up to 70% of their DNA. So that's basically confirming the literary picture we have of Ashkenazi Jews being essentially the descendants of Middle Eastern Jews making their way through the Italian peninsula.
Exactly what I said in the debate. Guerrilla Hebrew misrepresented Professor Abramson. But it gets worse. So let me first reiterate. Professor Abramson emphasizes that Ashkenazi Jews had their origin in the Middle East as part of the people of Israel. He also says they can be traced back to the Jews who lived in Jerusalem but were enslaved and exiled to Rome in 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. He states that they also intermingled with Sephardic Jewish families. He states that the DNA studies confirm what Jewish history teaches us, and he simply mentions the Kalonymus family as one among other Ashkenazi families. And by the way, my own DNA is 90% Ashkenazi, 10% Sephardic. So this mingling with other Jewish communities is part of our history as well. All right. Professor Abramson refutes Guerrilla Hebrew. In reality, Professor Abrams supports all my key points about history and DNA and completely refutes Guerrilla Hebrew. You heard it out of his own mouth. Okay, what about this whole Kalonymus family that became a big thing and a big part of the debate? Let's listen to Guerrilla Hebrew more about that.
Now let's go to the Jewish Virtual Library and see what they had to say about the Kalonymus family. The Kalonymus, one of the most eminent Jewish families in Germany, which flourished from the 9th to 13th century, especially in the cities near the Rhine. Among its members were numerous rabbis, preachers, poets, teachers, authors, moralists, and theologians, and most of the prominent communal leaders of this period came from its ranks. The origin of that family go back to the 8th century Italy. Notice it's Italy they go back to, not Israel, Italy. Although the name Kalonymus appeared in Talmudic literature, the father of Onkelos, the great translator of the Bible, was, according to AskDrBrown 11a, called Kalonymus. So we're tracking this history of this Kalonymus family, right? So they reference the oldest Kalonymus member who's referenced in Talmudic literature.
That's not what it says. As I pointed out in the debate, but I want to point out here, yes, he read it correctly. We'll put the text on the screen for you. He read that correctly, but he completely misread it, okay? It doesn't say that the origins of the family go back to this man in the Talmud in Kalonymus. It's saying that as you trace back the family, it doesn't go to Khazars, it goes back to when Jews came to Italy in the 8th century, all right? And he's just looking for the name Kalonymus. Here, my father was Abram Brown. We lived on Lincoln Avenue. There's no connection between Abram, who lived on Lincoln Avenue, and Abraham Lincoln. There's no connection between the man in the Talmud, several men in the Talmud named Kalonymus, including the father of Onkelos, and someone who lived 700-800 years later named Kalonymus. No one is tracing back the origins of that family to a convert in the Talmud. It's simply saying, here are people who had the same name. That's all it's saying. As for Avodah Zarah, the Gemara mentions other Romans who converted to Judaism. It relates Onkelos bar Kalonymus converted to Judaism. Right, so Onkelos, who's the son of a man named Kalonymus, converted to Judaism. What does that have to do with a completely unrelated man, 800 years later, named Kalonymus? Nothing. No more than Abram Brown, who lived on Lincoln Avenue, is connected to Abraham Lincoln. As I said, though, things actually get worse. Let me just scroll down here. So here's what Guerrilla Hebrew falsely claims. He claims that the Kalonymus family went back only to Italy, not the Middle East. But that is not what the Jewish Virtual Library was saying. And remember his claim, well, go back to the Khazars, others point that out. He cited scholars who agree with that theory, okay? They don't mention Khazars here. They mention Italy. In other words, this is where the family became prominent. This is where you trace the family back. It's not their ancient origins, because everyone knows their ancient origins go back to Israel. That is not what the Jewish Virtual Library was saying. It was simply tracing back the recent roots of this particular family, like saying my family roots go back to New York City, where I was born, rather than to Russia, where my father's parents came from, or England, where my mother's parents came from. It is fully understood on all accounts that the ancient origins of this prominent Jewish family go back to biblical Israel, as Professor Abramson has already told us. More importantly, the Jewish Virtual Library does not say that the earliest member of the family went back to Talmudic times. Actually, this very statement completely contradicts what Guerrilla Hebrew just claimed, namely that the family can only be traced back to Italy, whereas the Talmud dates back centuries early. The article only traces back the name Kalonymus, explaining that it's first found in the Talmud. That's it. The article does not trace back Kalonymus from the 8th century AD to people with the same name in the Talmud, not at all. And he falsely claims that the Talmud is speaking of the origins of the Kalonymus family. Friends, that is simply a lie, an absolute lie, or a complete misunderstanding of the Talmudic source. Either way, it doesn't go well in terms of fact-checking these sources. And one more point, he also lied, claiming that Professor Abramson traced back Ashkenazi Jews to the Kalonymus family. False. He said these were some of the families involved. So, you want to know the real history of the Kalonymus family? They were not converts. Here, let me read what they wrote themselves. I, Eliezer HaKatan, received the true version of prayers from my father and teacher, Rabbi Judah, son of Rabbi Kalonymus, son of Moses, son of Rabbi Judah, son of Rabbi Kalonymus, son of Rabbi Moses, son of Rabbi Kalonymus, son of Judah. And I also received it from Judah HaChassid, as he received it from his father, Rabbi Simla HaChassid, and on and on. I've got page after page where they're going back with their history. This is not the family of converts. One after the other. I'm not going to take the time to cite all of it. Go down a couple more slides. This list is as close to a Kalonymus family tree as exists today, though many more families of the members of the family are known from other sources. GRLA Hebrew has totally misrepresented the source. They're actually turning it on its head. Friends, I got to be honest, this is nothing less than bald-faced deception. Being perfectly honest with you. Listen to this. You want to hear a culmination of lies. And I'm going to do my best to get this to Professor Harry Abramson himself. I don't know him, but I'm going to do my best to get this to him because he will be shocked and upset that his words were so twisted and that someone could bear false witness about him on this level. Let's listen to what GRLA Hebrew says.
So according to Dr. Henry Abramson, the Jewish Virtual Library, and the Talmud, the Ashkenazi Jews were founded by a family of Italian Roman converts. They cannot be the legit children of Israel.
All right, so I want to say this as plainly as I can. Every word of that is an absolute lie and a complete misrepresentation of the sources. And if that's not apparent, you go back through the video, go back through everything we've done so far. There's no debate about this. There's no question about this. This was complete, absolute deception or self-deception to misread these sources. I'm talking about absolute lies and nothing less. So, sources cited thus far by GRLA Hebrew, he twisted, perverted, turned upside down, and misrepresented. Throw them all out, and you heard the truth out of the horse's mouth from Professor Abramson himself. Okay, not only so, but GRLA Hebrew even misrepresented my own beliefs. Let's play the next clip.
Right? Dr. Brown affirms, as he's already said, that the Israelites of antiquity were not white. There was not a single white Jew until roughly the 8th century AD. And the Igbo of Nigeria have a valid claim to Israelite descent, which basically is a virtual forfeiture of this debate. I'll explain later. Right? He also just today said there's no doubt that there are both black and Hispanic Jews, also a virtual forfeiture. Right? He also says the Israelites were not white, but they were also not black, but brown. But if you take a look at our chart here.
Yeah. So first thing is that I never made the statement. Never, ever. I never said, quote, there was not a single white Jew until roughly the 8th century AD. Never said it. That's a lie. I don't believe it. I never said it. I've said everything contrary to that. First thing. Second thing, he brought up the Igbo, talked about them extensively. I didn't bring up the Igbo. I don't have an official position on the Igbo where I've done teaching on it, laid out my views about the Igbo. I have not said anything definitive about the Igbo in Nigeria. But even if they have a valid claim to Israelite descent, this is in harmony with what I said in the debate, rather than being a virtual forfeiture of this debate. As the Jewish people spread around the world, they intermarried with the local peoples, producing black Jews, white Jews, Indian Jews, Chinese Jews, and others. It's the same with my statement about Hispanic Jews. There's no forfeiture or agreeing to anything here. So you see what we're dealing with. Not only misrepresenting other sources, but putting words in my mouth that I never said and then using those to debate. Why would someone do this if they're on the side of truth? Let's keep going. He quotes from sequencing.com when he gets into a discussion of DNA. Now, he said he rejects DNA, going back that far, so you can trust him or you can trust all the world's top geneticists and DNA science for what it's used in worldwide study. That's another choice you can make. But let's listen to what he says about sequencing.com.
There's been talk about DNA, Oh, there's been talk about DNA. And it's funny that there's been so much talk about DNA. I knew he was going to do this, right? So now I don't subscribe to the idea that there's DNA that can actually trace anybody back anywhere in antiquity. I don't subscribe to that whatsoever, but he does. There's a problem with that. So the problem with DNA, according to sequencing.com, which is a leading DNA research company, Jewishness is more difficult to identify in genetic testing than other ethnic groups. This is because there is no specific gene that makes a person Jewish. Also, straightforward DNA examination cannot conclusively tell a person whether or not they are Jewish descent or a part of a Jewish population. So what's interesting is one of his objections to the 12 tribe chart was, well, you cannot demonstrate a genetic connection between these people, but it is impossible for anybody to actually demonstrate a genetic connection between any modern people and the ancient Israelites. That cannot be done. So he's asking me to do something that is not only impossible, but something that his people cannot do either.
False. Why didn't he tell you the rest of what sequencing.com had to say? See, he accurately quoted one part. He didn't quote the part that comes immediately before it. Let me read it for you. If you're suspecting that you have Jewish ancestry, you might be wondering whether a Jewish DNA test can put your doubts to bed. Click here to learn more. So this is the opening paragraph on the page answering the question, can a DNA test identify Jewish ancestry? Their answer is yes. Here, look at it on the website, okay? This is the website he quoted to you. Why didn't he tell you about this part? Can a DNA test identify Jewish ancestry? And it tells you, click here to find out more so you can put your doubts to bed. This is on the sequencing.com website. Why didn't he tell you that? He took one statement out of context and didn't tell you the rest. Oh, let me read you other things on sequencing.com that he failed to tell you. He left out this paragraph immediately before his quotes. There are over 15.2 million Jewish people across the globe, so they fully agree with my definition of Jewishness, not Guerrilla Hebrews, who says there are well over 400 million. And this rich and vibrant community is only growing. If you believe that you're part of it, a Jewish DNA test can help you become more secure in your identity so that you can proudly join these communities. And he also left out this. This text immediately followed after the words he cited. However, a DNA test can give you this information in other logical and accurate ways. So it's not just going to say, oh, here's the Jewish gene. But by looking at genetic history, it's going to be able to tell you, yes, for sure, you are of the Jewish people. And he left this out, too. This is all on the site that he quoted. He said it's a reliable site, right? Respected site. Quote, the forced dispersal of the Jewish population from the Kingdom of Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean resulted in Jewish communities scattering throughout the world in what is known as the Jewish diaspora. People in these dispersed Jewish communities tended to have children with people who shared the same religious culture, and over time, people in these Jewish communities began to share more DNA with one another. This is where your ethnicity numbers come into play when you get DNA testing and analyze your family history. So you've got family history of Jewishness, you want to confirm it, you can absolutely confirm it through DNA. That's what they're telling you. So again, the big question, why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that? Look, this website was encouraging Jews to confirm their Jewishness by DNA. Why did Guerrilla Hebrew give you the exact opposite impression? There was even a long section titled, What are the benefits of proving your ancestry? The website even says, if you can prove Jewish ancestry, Jewish gene, you may also qualify to go to Israel as part of the birthright program. So you can prove Jewish ancestry according to the site that he posted to say you can't. This gives you a free trip to the nation and a plethora of culturally enhancing experiences that you will remember for a lifetime. You will have an opportunity to get more in touch with your Jewish roots and to learn new things about the Israeli and Middle East culture and the history of Judaism. So once again, Guerrilla Hebrew misrepresented his sources. Okay, next is Professor Raphael Falk. And top geneticist, Khazar, Guerrilla Hebrew sings his praises, talks about this as peer-reviewed, not just some internet article. Oh, we'll get to the internet articles in a little while, but peer-reviewed research. How did he represent Professor Falk? Let's listen.
Another problem with DNA. According to Raphael Falk, an Ashkenazi Jew and geneticist who was professor of genetics at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Is he qualified enough for you? There is no Jewish genotype to identify. Also, same guy, Raphael Falk, again, an Ashkenazi Jew who is a geneticist and professor at the Hebrew University. Also, there is no agreed upon criterion to identify Jews, and samples examined for the distribution of biological or molecular markers all depend on the preconceived biases of the investigators. I want everybody to make sure they understand that loud and clear. This is an Ashkenazi Jew who is a geneticist and a professor, and he says these conclusions that are being came to by these Jews that allegedly affirm their identity with DNA are all depend on preconceived biases.
All right, so did he represent Professor Falk accurately? Oh, he quoted those little snippets accurately. Professor Falk is concerned that if you just tie race into biology explicitly and leave it there, that you can have the type of hatred you had in the Holocaust, where Jews as a race were systematically destroyed. But what Guerrilla Hebrew didn't tell you is everything else that Professor Falk said. So he confirmed, this is in the study, I'm going to give you quotes, the importance of the Y chromosome among Ashkenazi and Sephardi priests, Kohanim, pointing to the common Israelite origin of these Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews. This is the point I made repeatedly, underscoring the ancient Israelite origins of my people. I'm going to quote from Professor Falk. Molecular markers were found that indicated common denominators, which were significantly more common among the Y chromosomes, so the paternal chromosomes of the Kohanim, than the Israelites in general. No less important, these denominators were common in Sephardi as well as Ashkenazi Kohanim, also in the Lemba Jews, I can point out. The social and political, also the religious meaning of a biological continuity of we are all Jews, often mentioned or implied, now attained overt corroboration, at least as far as the Kohanim represented a fair sample of Jews. So to say, hey, we're Jews and we know it. Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardic Jews. Yes, this has been confirmed among those who are priests. Yes. Here's what he also said. The apparent achievement of the children of the priest Aaron in maintaining their distinct status over a very long time and across very diverse socio-geographic distance is even more remarkable when juxtaposed with that of the remaining children of the tribe of Levi, the Levites. So the Levites, much more dispersed, much less in common, but those of priestly descent have a high percentage that can say we all go back to a common Middle Eastern ancestor. Obviously, the logic is Aaron in the Bible. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that Professor Falk loudly and clearly, this respected geneticist, Khazar wants you to take this seriously, right? Why didn't he tell you that he confirmed a very important point I made repeatedly in the debate? Oh, but there's something even more important that Professor Falk said. He said this. This is one of my other key points. I said repeatedly that we know we are Jews by our shared history and culture and religion. Here's what Professor Falk wrote in this very same article. Quote, obviously, what kept Jews' identity were the language, culture, tradition, and religion. The very argument I had, the very thing that we've had now for several thousand years unbroken. Thus, whatever their biological heredity kinships, both the transgenerational vertical and intrageneration horizontal relationships are secondary consequences. However, the increasing reliance on scientific reductionism in biological thinking of the last 2 centuries eventually culminated in turning the evidence of DNA sequences into the essence of the characterization of Jewishness rather than its consequence. So in other words, the shared DNA is the consequence of us being a shared people, not our essence, but the consequence of us being one people through history. And how do we know it? We've had common language. We've had common history. We can trace these things back. This is Professor Falk, who Guerrilla Hebrew wants you to listen to. So in Professor Falk's opinion, more important than DNA in determining Jewish identity is the fact that we have a continuous, unbroken history of religious observance and culture, the very thing that Guerrilla Hebrew and the people on the 12 tribes chart do not have. In fact, he said, we know we're the real ones because we don't have that history. That's what he said about people on the chart. Again, I ask, why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that Professor Falk differed with him and agreed with me? Why withhold such crucial information? And Professor Falk would be the last person to agree with Guerrilla Hebrew that DNA cannot trace things back so far in history. To the contrary, that's his whole field. He simply opposes making race a matter of genes alone. So, on the essential points I was arguing for, Professor Falk affirms them and would be the first to tell you that, say, Native Americans or your average person living in Mexico has no connection to ancient Israel genetically. All right, what about Professor Paul Wexler, a Yiddish linguist, together with some other Israeli scholars who argued for the Khazarian origins of the Ashkenazi people? Listen to Al-Azhar once again.
The problem with DNA and linguistics. In 2017, Paul Wexler, an Ashkenazi Jew and a linguist, and is a professor of linguistics at Tel Aviv University in Israel, along with a few other scholars, published an article in Frontiers of Genetics called The Origin of Ashkenazic Jews, and Yiddish. They came to some interesting conclusions with their findings, right? So again, here is an Ashkenazi Jew who is a linguist and a professor at another prestigious university in the country of Israel, right? And he did a genetic and linguistic test. Remember, because Dr. Michael Brown also utilizes linguistics as evidence to validate the legitimacy of Ashkenazi Jews as children of Israel. So let's see what they found in 2017. And I guarantee that this scholarship and these studies are more up to date than the ones he's utilizing to affirm the Ashkenazi Jews' legitimacy as Israelites.
Yeah, well, that guarantee goes out the window because there were studies written after that one that refute it. And I was actually citing from studies after that. I just didn't put the sources up for you, but I had them in my PowerPoint. So he correctly told you that Professor Wexler, a Yiddish linguist, suggested that there could be Khazarian Turkic origins of Yiddish. He didn't tell you that Professor Wexler's views have been rejected by the top Yiddish scholars. And that's why I quoted Professor Alexander Bieder, author of the prestigious volume Origins of Yiddish Dialects, published by Oxford University Press, one of the leading scholarly publishers in the world. Here's a picture of the book. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages long with a lengthy, detailed refutation of the Khazarian hypothesis at the end of it. I mean, detailed. I went through it. It is detailed and massive. All right, you want to get the top scholarship on it, this is where you go. As I stated during the debate, quote, there is absolutely no linguistic connection between the Khazarian people who spoke a Turkic language and Ashkenazi Jews whose first language, Yiddish, is very close to German. The Yiddish linguist and onomastic expert Alexander Bieder, I said this during the debate, has stated that, quote, the corpus of personal names and surnames borne by Jews in Eastern Europe during the last 6 centuries, as well as the Yiddish language as a whole, do not contain any link to Khazaria. This was cited in the foreword September 25th, 2017. As for Middle Eastern DNA used by Wexler and his colleagues, let's listen to Guerrilla Hebrew again.
So they went and got Middle Eastern ancient DNA, and it disqualified the Ashkenazi Jews from that being their place of origin. This is an Ashkenazi Jew himself, again, who is a professor of linguistics at Tel Aviv University, right? And our results reinforce the non-Levantine origin of the Ashkenazi Jews. And again, you can go to this. This is a peer-reviewed article in the Frontiers in Genetics called The Origin of the Ashkenazic, and Yiddish.
Now, I want you to notice again, he's referred to a couple of articles as peer-reviewed, not just internet articles. So what we're going to see after this is internet articles and other bogus stuff. But even the peer-reviewed stuff, he's only telling you part of the story. Why not bring everything to the light? Why not say some say this, but the overwhelming scholarship says the other? Why not, if you have the truth, why not bring it? Why hide it from people? Why be afraid that people are going to find out that what you're saying is a small part of the scholarly discussion and that scholars overwhelmingly reject your position? Why not actually say that? So Guerrilla Hebrew failed to tell you that the Middle Eastern samples were faulted by other scholars, along with the overall methodology of the study. So after that was published, a rebuttal study was published. The study relied on by Guerrilla Hebrew has been trashed by top scholars. The study was dismissed by Sergio Della Pergola as a falsification, noting it failed to include Jewish groups such as the Itakim and Sephardic Jews, to whom Ashkenazi Jews are closely related genetically. Shaul Stamfer called Alhaik, this is one of the other Israeli scholars with Wexler, called his research basically nonsense. Elhaik replied that the DNA of non-Ashkenazic Jews would not affect the origin of DNA hypothesized for the former. David Katz criticized the study's linguistic analysis, stating, the authors have melded accurate but contextually meaningless genetic correlations with laughable linguistic theories. There is not a single word or sound in Yiddish that comes from Iranian or Turkish. In a joint study published in 2016 by Genome Biology and Evolution, this is refuting the earlier study that these other gentlemen that GRLA Hebrew mentioned put out. He mentioned a popular one after that. This is the first one, and they're refuting it. Pavel, going on and on and on. Here's a list of all the names of the people involved, these top professors. I'm not going to take the time to read every single name here. They dismissed both the genetic and linguistic components of Elhak and others, arguing that GPS is a provenancing tool suited to inferring the geographic region where a modern and recently undermixed genome is mostly likely to arise, but it is hardly suitable for mixed populations and for tracing ancestry up to 1,000 years before present, as its authors had previously claimed. Moreover, all methods of historical linguistics concur that Yiddish is a Germanic language with no reliable evidence for Slavic, Iranian, or Turkic substrata. The authors concluded, in our view, Dawson co-authors have attempted to fit together a marginal and unsupported interpretation of linguistic data and on and on. So they completely throw it out. This is the study, Pitfalls of the Geographic Population Structure GPS Approach Applied to Human Genetic History, a case study of Ashkenazi Jews with a list of the scholars involved. That is the more recent study that completely rebuts. These top scholars saying, throw it out. It is falsification, nonsense. GRLA Hebrew falsely guaranteed he was citing the latest findings. The article which I alluded to in my presentation was written specifically to rebut the erroneous conclusions of the article by Professor Wexler and others. Their scholarly article was published in 2016. The one he cited was based on that study published in 2017. So here's the question. Did GRLA Hebrew not know this? Remember, he guaranteed it. This is most recent. No, it's been completely rebutted and rejected by world-class scholars. Was he not aware that the findings he cited had been widely rejected, or did he withhold this information from you? Then he cites an article from 2004 in Human Genetics, back to GRLA Hebrew.
There was a test done in 2004 on over 400 Jews. This is the largest test study that I can find. And take a look. So if we just chose one, let's say we said E1B1B was Jacob's haplogroup, right? That means that 84% of Ashkenazi Jews would be disqualified, right? If I chose G2C, 92% of Ashkenazi Jews disqualified. J1 or J2, 81% of Ashkenazi Jews would be disqualified. Q1, 94% of Ashkenazi Jews would be disqualified, right? So on and so forth. So this alleged evidence that he has so much faith in actually totally works against him.
Well, actually, as you just saw there, he's not a genetic scientist, but neither am I, which is why I rely on the genetic scientists to speak for themselves, not to let someone utterly uneducated in genetics, like GRLA Hebrew, or me, for that matter. I'm not going to put my interpretation on it. I'll let them speak for themselves. This is 2004. We have stuff much more recent. But here's what he didn't tell you. I'm going to quote from the article. Here's what the scholars say themselves. We have examined a set of 32 binary markers, single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs, and 10 microsatellites on the non-recombining portion of the Y chromosome, NRY, to investigate the ways in which patterns of variation differ between Ashkenazi Jewish and their non-Jewish host populations in Europe. This set of SNPs defines a total of 20 NRY haplogroups in these populations, at least 4 of which are likely to have been part of the ancestral Ashkenazi gene pool in the Near East. So he's telling you that you can trace things back, the Ashkenazi gene pool, when you go all the way back. Where does it come from? The Near East. What's he talking about? Ancient Israel. And then you have these other things brought in through intermarriage. Just again, as you have black Jews, white Jews, Hispanic Jews, Chinese Jews, Indian Jews, because of intermarriage in the different places where the tribes of Israel have been scattered. They're telling you Ashkenazi Jews have origins in the Near East. GRLA Hebrew also totally ignored this major study from late 2022, and I cited it. One of the first things that I cited about DNA in the debate. Genome-wide data from medieval Germany show that the Ashkenazi founder event predated the 14th century. It's Cell, volume 185, December 8th, 2022. Here's a picture of the study as posted online. All right. This is a list of the authors in this peer-reviewed study. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you about this? Devastating arguments against his position from some of the top genetic scholars in the world. There's a list of them. I'm not going to read through this, right? Linguists and others, top scholars. Their conclusion, quote, analysis of Ashkenazi Jews together with a large sample from the region of the Khazar Khaganate corroborates the earliest results that Ashkenazi Jews derive their ancestry primarily from populations of the Middle East and Europe. So, Middle East and then intermarriage in Europe, that they possess considerable shared ancestry with other Jewish populations. Why? Because we're all from the same people. And that there is no indication of a significant genetic contribution either from within or from north of the Caucasus region. So, in other words, no Khazar connection. Another question. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you about this study, which I also cited in the debate? Human biology. No evidence of genome-wide data of a Khazar origin for the Ashkenazi Jews. Our origins are ancient Israel. There is no evidence of a Khazar gene. I've just got a list here, and I'm just going to go through the slides of all the scholars, all the professors involved in the study, okay? It's page after page. I actually held that list up to show you. This is what we're talking about. So in the debate, I quoted from this, but didn't list the source. I simply quoted from it. Jewish and Middle Eastern non-Jewish populations share a common proof of Y chromosome biallelic haplotypes, going back to 2000, top scholars involved there. The results support the hypothesis that the paternal gene pools of Jewish communities from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East descended from a common Middle Eastern ancestral population and suggest that most Jewish communities have remained relatively isolated from neighboring non-Jewish communities during and after the diaspora. Note also the Genetic Literacy Project, which boasts about science, not ideology. The article, Are Modern Jews Converted Khazarian Pagans? No, is the answer. More evidence of Middle Eastern roots. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that the evidence is overwhelmingly against what he was saying genetically? Why couldn't he give you all the information to evaluate for yourself? Team of researchers based at 11 labs in New York City and Israel has for the first time set up a database of genomes drawn exclusively from Ashkenazi Jews. The work is expected to be medically valuable not only for diseases common in this population, but with respect to cancer, for instance, for everybody, according to the paper's senior author, Issachar, an associate professor of computer science and systems biology at Columbia University. But the research has also provided additional evidence for a current genetic theory about the origins of the Ashkenazim, that the founding population numbered no more than a few hundred people, Jewish men from the Middle East and the local women they married after they arrived in Egypt. So a small number, hundreds of Jewish men. That's the bottleneck event that was mentioned earlier. Make their way into Europe. Women then marry in, so descent through the father here. Women then marry in, convert into Judaism, and we trace our roots back to Israel and the Middle East, not to the Khazars, not to someone else. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you about these studies? It's an honest question. When you have the truth, you bring everything into the light. Why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that his sources are either outdated, rejected, or misinterpreted? What's he hiding from you? Aren't you able to decide for yourself based on facts? Why not give people facts to deal with? But it gets worse. He now cites totally bogus internet articles. Remember, he's saying peer-reviewed, right? Okay, let's listen to this claim.
So when Spaniards came, right, they noticed that the tribe of Issachar, the Mexicans, right, the indigenous Mexicans had obsidian knives that they used for circumcision, which is known as a Jewish rite. So here we see a tradition. We see DNA linking them to the Middle East, and we see a Jewish tradition, right? It also says the Nahua Uto-Aztecan language itself has been shown to have many Hebraic Semitic roots and can be traced to northwest Palestine, where parts of the Israelite tribe of Issachar settled. And this is via Robin Moran, a historian from the University of Manchester and the University of California at Riverside, right?
All right.
Moving on. This also, he says there's no ancient oral tradition that says that these people are from the tribe of Issachar. The Mexicans originally of the 10 tribes captured by Salmanasar and of the family of Issachar, whom the Indians recognize as their special ancestor. What?
All right. So these are internet myths. Nothing more than internet myths. So this is the kind of internet article that he disparaged earlier. Remember, he said, no, it's not just some internet article. What he just cited for you was one of those internet articles.
So
this is not an academic article. It's not peer-reviewed. Instead, it's entirely internet myth based on wild speculation. I found the source online, okay? So here's the background to Guerrilla Hebrew's big point. The article cites someone else who speaks of a, quote, divine book, which has never been seen by a European, which supposedly is connected to Hebrew. So nobody ever saw the book, right? And it supposedly proves that they had a connection to Hebrew. In other words, this is 100% undocumented, uncorroborated hearsay. The article then claims this appears to be associated more with Aztecs than with Maya, than the Uto-Aztecan language itself has been shown to have many Hebraic Semitic roots and can be traced to northwest Palestine, where parts of the Israelite tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Zebulun, Asher, and Issachar settled. Friends, every word of what you just saw there is false. Every single word. First, there's not a Semitic scholar on the planet who would corroborate the statement. And to all Hebrew Israelites, if you believe the statement is true, find me documented Semitic scholarship to back this claim about tracing the Aztec language back to northwest Palestine, not internet myths. Second, as explained in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Nahuan languages, also called Azteca, Nahua, or Nahuatlan, subgroup of the Uto-Aztecan languages, now considered a division of the Carajal Aztecan subgroup of Southern Uto-Aztecan, also called Sonoran. The Nahuan language includes Pachutec and Nahua, made up of Pipil and Nahauti. The Nahuatl language has many dialects and is spoken throughout Mexico. Pipil is spoken only in El Salvador. Nothing whatsoever to do with Hebrew or Semitic languages. Zero. And my field is Near Eastern languages and literatures. That's where I have my PhD. And Guerrilla Hebrew kept saying, oh, it's top scholar, top scholar. Well, how about listening to me here when I'm talking to you about language? But don't even listen to me. Research it for yourself. There is not a Semitic scholar on the planet who connects the Aztec language to ancient Israel, specifically northwest Palestine. So did Guerrilla Hebrew knowingly cite a totally bogus internet source, one that's based on hearsay and linguistic drivel? Or was he ignorant of the fact that the source was false? And for the record, Robert Marett was not a Hebrew Semitic scholar, nor are many of the words in the internet article his own. He simply repeated other non-scholarly accounts as well. So somebody claimed to see a book that nobody else ever saw, and claimed that it traces back to Hebrew, and then they claim that they had these Israelite practices. Nobody has corroborated this. No scholar, archaeologist, historian that's respected has corroborated a word of this. Then he cites from a Spanish chronicle. It's one author's personal opinion dating back to the late 1600s without any evidence to support. And it's totally contradicted by all national traditions of the Mexican people, both the native people and the later Spanish population. Who on earth today relies on the opinion of Baltasar de Medina? Who ever even heard of him? There's not one single respected historian of Mexico who would agree with the claim that the Mexican people are the tribe of Issachar. Once again, show me the peer-reviewed academic studies. There are none. But there are more ridiculous claims. All right, I'm just fact-checking the sources. Thus far, we've seen every single one he either blatantly misrepresented, or didn't tell you that they have been completely contradicted, or didn't tell you that they are internet myths. All right, so here's more from Guerrilla Hebrew.
So if we follow Dr. Brown's logic, we have genetic and linguistic evidence coupled with tradition that ties Mexican people to the tribe of Issachar. We also have a city in Mexico called Issachar de Matamoros in southwestern part of Mexican state of Puebla. Puebla is Spanish for village. So basically, this place is called the village of Issachar.
All right, number one, there is no genetic connection between Mexicans and Israel. As reported on science.org, June 2014, Mexico contains 65 different indigenous ethnic groups, 20 of which are represented in a recent study, says Andres Moreno Estrada, a population geneticist at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California, and the study's lead author. So I'm not going to quote the rest of the details here, but just notice this. Mexico, you have the native peoples, native population, then you have the Spanish coming in, then others joining together. To make them all into the tribe of Issachar, of course, is completely impossible just to start because they're completely diverse people from different parts of the world, all right? But at least 65 different indigenous ethnic groups, right? Now, a major 2021 study published in Nature Communications says this: the genetic makeup of indigenous populations inhabiting Mexico has been strongly influenced by geography and demographic history. Here we perform a genome-wide analysis of 716 newly genotyped individuals from 60 of the 60 recognized ethnic groups in Mexico. We show that the genetic structure of these populations is strongly influenced by geography, and our demographic reconstruction suggests a decline in the population size of all tested populations in the last 15 to 30 generations. And they go through all this. Here are the conclusions. The people are more closely related to Mesoamerican, South American populations than to those from Aridoamerica, showing an even more complex history of divergence than recognized. So many, many diverse peoples here. Absolutely not one people, tribe of Issachar. Absolutely not genetically related, but going back to a completely different part of the world. There's no genetic connection whatsoever. And dozens of authors contributed to this study. I'm talking about the top scholarship. I'm just going to put this on the screen for you to see a list of all the scholars involved, telling you that there is no genetic connection between the ancient Mexican people and the people in general and Issachar or Israel, period. Zero. So, as we already know, the Mexicans represent many different peoples. Since the original native population was merged with the later Spanish population, they're clearly not Issachar. As for the genetic origins of the different people groups, including the Mayans, they do not trace back to ancient Israel. So there is no genetic connection. There is no national historic connection. And Issachar does not equal Issachar. Issachar versus Issachar. As for the claim that a village named Issachar proves that Mexicans are Issachar, this is beyond laughable. First, there are multiplied tens of thousands of cities and towns and villages in Mexico. You'd expect there to be scores of names that sounded like Bible names, just by poor chance. Second, Issachar in Spanish is Issachar, not Issachar. So you should have an S instead of a Z, you should have a CH instead of a C, and you should have an A instead of a U. So the phonetic and morphological connection disappears anyway. So in sum, there's no genetic connection between Mexico and Issachar. There's no historical traditional connection between Mexico and Issachar. And there's no linguistic connection between Mexico and Issachar. Now, in a separate video, I'm going to fact check the scripture references that were used. Oh, that's even more mind-boggling than the misrepresentation of sources here, the misuse of scripture. But let's just finish up with a few more of his sources. Once more, back to Alazar.
So in the book Lost Tribes and Promised Lands, Antonio Mendecinos gives his testimony on his interaction with the Seminole Indians.
All right. And here's what it says. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke far beyond the other bank of the river. This is what he posted. In response to a signal, the two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians, to the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge. The woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue that Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her male companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they rose, went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. So he did get that quote. It's from Ronald Sanders, himself Jewish, Lost Tribes and Promised Lands. All right? What he didn't tell you is Sanders doesn't believe a word of it. The whole thing's a myth. Sanders is quoting it as one of these ancient myths. So, first question, the obvious question, how come no one else in history ever found these Indians who could recite the Shema? These American Indians. How come no one has ever found this group and nobody ever claimed to have found the group reciting the Shema? Why is there no one in recorded history or ever since who found these people? All right. Second, and more importantly, why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you that the author of the book he cited didn't believe the story was true? Here's what Sanders wrote, quote, a brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue, according to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader of his narrative as is that of his 3 mysterious new companions. You say, where in the world did they all learn Hebrew? This is what the author is saying. And then this, with this final flourish, Montesinos had turned his tale of the lost tribes into a bit of propaganda for the Dutch conquest of Brazil at the same time. He calls it a tale. It's made up. It's fictional. So here, Alazar quotes something in the debate. Oh, people see it. Wow, he's bringing sources. Once again, he completely misrepresented the source and turned it on its head. It is quoted as a myth, as some of the ancient myths that circulated. That's why he quotes it. It is a tale. It was propaganda and nothing more. So to add insult to injury, even in the totally made-up story, the American Indians are not speaking Lashon Kodesh, but normal Hebrew. I mean, it makes it even funnier. So in any case, why didn't he tell you that the very author he was citing didn't believe the story for a minute? And this is the exact kind of thing I warned about. I want to quote my exact words in the debate. Over the course of Al-Azhar's presentation, listen carefully for factual, historically verifiable, conclusive evidence that connects the different groups of this chart to the specific tribes of Israel listed, not general alleged connections or highly suspect historical anecdotes, which we just had, or convoluted biblical interpretations, which we had the whole night, but clear, indisputable, historical, scriptural, and genetic connections to each specific tribe. None exist. These were my words during the debate. So, no genetic connections between American Indians and Israel. I gave documentation for this during the debate, also referencing the important book by former Mormon leader Simon Southerton, Losing a Lost Tribe. And then, lastly, he even misrepresents the story of B'nai Manasseh. Let's listen.
I want to point everybody here, right? Because he apparently doesn't accept the proof that we've brought tonight. But here are the B'nai Manasseh, right? The B'nai Manasseh have been accepted into Israel as the tribe of Manasseh, right? And the movement began in 1951 when a tribal leader reported having a dream that his people's ancient homeland was Israel, with others then embracing the idea that they were Jews. All it took was one guy having a dream in 1951 for this group of Tibetan people to be accepted as the tribe of Manasseh by the Israelis.
Is that true? No, not at all. So first, DNA testing was not conclusive. So the Israeli authorities could not rule out the possibility that this was part of a lost tribe. Second, they were only accepted as Jews in Israel, given the right to emigrate, after undergoing a formal conversion to Judaism. All right, let's add that in. But Guerrilla Hebrew failed to tell you this. He said somebody just had a dream, right? Okay. According to Jewish Voice, B'nai Manasseh of Northern India, December 2015, quote, they have ancient traditions handed down orally from generation to generation, honoring the patriarchs Abraham, Moriah, a reference to Isaac and Mount Moriah, where Abraham was called to sacrifice his son, and Jacob. To this day, they conduct a sacrificial ceremony on an altar reminiscent of the ancient temple altar. Their priest uses the Hebrew name of God as it appears in the Bible, and also speaks of Mount Sinai, Mount Moriah, and Mount Zion. When discovered by Christian missionaries, they were performing biblical circumcision using a stone and observing either Old Testament ordinances such as those regarding skin disease. This is the B'nai Manasseh, the sons of Manasseh, who tradition believes to be one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, exiled by the Assyrians when they captured the northern kingdom of Israel in the 8th century BC. According to the Israel 21C website, isolated from the world, the B'nai Manasseh, children of Manasseh, continued practicing biblical Judaism and dreaming of their return for 2,700 years. So why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew tell you all this? Why did he paint such a misleading picture? And why didn't Guerrilla Hebrew, why did he have to construct this false narrative? So I want to play one last clip for you. And this will answer a question. This is a conversation between two highly respected African-American professors, Glenn Loury and John McWhorter. I want you to see what they had to say because it is really, really eye-opening. This is Professor Loury speaking. Why construct this whole thing? Why try to claim we go back to ancient Israel as Black Americans? We're all descendants of the tribes of Judah. Listen to this very eloquent discussion.
First thing of Orlando Patterson's that I ever read, it was an essay that he published in the 70s in the Public Interest called the Orlando Patterson, the great sociologist, Harvard sociologist, and Afro-Jamaican American. An essay called Towards a Future That Has No Past, in which he identified this problem that confronts African Americans or Afro-descended people in the diaspora more broadly, which is that the Holocaust of slavery, that break, where people are kidnapped and they're carted away and they're then blended in with all these different cultures and languages and customs and whatnot. And Patterson goes on years later to publish his great treatise, Slavery and Social Death. And one of the defining features of slavery for Patterson was natal alienation, what he called natal alienation. And this had to do with the breaking of bonds across generations within family lines, because the master intercedes with his property claim into the intimate domesticity of the life of the slave. And it's more general than that. It's losing your language. It's losing the tales of oral history that tell you in a way who you are. And you have to figure out again who you are. That was the challenge that he identifies in this essay for all of us. We have to somehow develop an understanding of who we are for now and into the future that is not rooted in the same deep way as it would have been had not the crime of slavery interceded. And I think that's a part of what's going on here. I mean, I hesitate to say this, but it's true. We Black Americans are by far the wealthiest and most powerful and most secure large population of African descent on the planet. We have inherited, as a consequence of the kidnapping of our ancestors, a pretty good hand to play in life relative to the descendants of Africa viewed in broad perspective. We're Americans. We're not Africans. English is our native tongue. We're Westerners, not people of the third world. I think we're still struggling, many of us, to come to terms with that. We're Christians. Not all of us, of course, obviously not all of us, but the impact of Christianity on the culture and the emergence of African-American society is profound. I think that Black Hebrew thing and that Black Muslim thing are partly a effort to break away from the Western inheritance and to kind of, or the Afrocentric thing, the Kwanzaa business and all of that. So anyway, just some idle thoughts about authenticity and the roots of African-American identity and culture.
Yeah, so those words speak very, very clearly from a leading Black American, highly respected scholar. And he's saying that with the kidnapping of identity, with the kidnapping of people, with the horrendous crime of slavery, that it stole a heritage. So now people are trying to recreate a heritage and find something that was not there. Listen, I've done scores and scores and scores of debates. I've never once taken the time to go back and fact check a debate like this and to put a video together, because I've never been involved in a debate where there was so much falsehood, falsification, and misrepresentation. So a few last words. As a Jewish follower of Yeshua, I urge you, find your primary identity in him. That's what matters ultimately to me, being in Jesus, being in him. And don't look in your own life for false claims about false connections to ancient Israel that don't exist. And those of you who might have a legitimate genetic and historical connection to the Jewish people, that makes us brothers, not enemies, brothers. And to those who are not true Jews, I don't hate you for that, not for a split second. Why then do you have so much hatred for me when you falsely claim that I'm a fake Jew? That kind of attitude is not from above, it's from below. So remember the words of Yeshua. This is the verdict, he said. Light has come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light, so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. So don't fear the light of truth. As Yeshua also said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Did Guerrilla Hebrew bring sources? Yes. Did he misrepresent the sources? Terribly. Did he even misquote the sources? Yes. Did he even quote sources that are completely, totally bogus? Yes. Did he even quote sources that the authors themselves reject? Yes. Did he not tell you about massive evidence that completely contradicts his positions? Yes, he failed to do that. Why? When you have the truth, you bring it all into the light. Sift it out, search it out for yourself, and may God himself, may the Most High guide you into all truth.